Get my 6. Guys, I usually set just a little bit outside the wood line at this location, but I came back into the woods because I am clearly hearing someone or something walking around back here in these woods behind me throwing things. And I took the phone off the tripod because I want to be able to go mobile and check our full perimeter, at least on the back 180. I'm going to tell you a story today that I have intentionally never told on YouTube. I've written about it just once in my novel Isle of Capri, which is a great book, and it's available with an autograph in print version from our Etsy store. The link's in the description box below. I wrote about it in that book. Most of that book is not fiction. It's guised as fiction, but perhaps when you hear the story, you'll understand why. These are the types of stories that are terrifying as hell because, number one, they're true. I give you my word that the story I'm going to tell you is entirely true, and it happened to me 20 years ago, okay? Number two, it's a type of story most people are afraid to tell because it's a type of story that ends up getting people disappeared. So, and then number three, social media platforms are very finicky when it comes to this type of story. It's a type of story where nobody really has the answers to the questions you'll be asking yourself after you hear the story. And so a lot of platforms choose to not participate in such subject matter. So don't be surprised if this video disappears. And keep getting my 6. I want to thank Thaddeus/Timothy Howard for the hat. Timothy, your wife saw the video I made last week when I talked about how I didn't know who sent me the hat because my wife threw the packaging that came in away so fast in the post office because we were approached by an interesting individual trying to sell us squid. Who has squid rolled up in a backpack at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Virginia when it's 90 degrees in the middle of summer? I think he might have had something other than squid in there. So anyway, thank you. Shout out to your wife for letting me know this. And our son Daniel says hello to your son Sean, who's 9, and gets a kick out of watching our videos too and hearing his name. Sean, your dad has good taste in hats. So as of this recording, it's early September. It's September 8th as of this recording, and we're rolling up on a very tragic anniversary most of us don't like to remember, 9/11. Events that changed the world, that changed the way a lot of us lived. The way, hey, I left Wall Street to enlist in the military shortly after that, and I think a lot of folks who had normal, middle-class schmo day jobs did the same. I know an entire generation of millennials, big percentage of them were watching those towers fall while they were sitting in their middle school classrooms, maybe even grade school classrooms, and they knew in that moment that when they turned 18, they were going into the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, the National Guard. I have 2 really good friends that come by here often. And not often, but for as often as we host people, they're always here. 2 really good buddies of mine. They were both in the Army. I've gotten to know them well. They're 34, 35 years old. They're millennials. And I remember the time I asked them both, why did you decide to join the Army? And the answer came quickly. It was like, because I watched those towers fall when I was sitting in an 8th grade classroom, and I knew in that moment I was going to join the Army when I grew up, and they did. And they're out now, but they continue to serve their country in other capacities from the civilian side. I actually have told this story in video format twice, maybe 3 times over the last 3 years, and then deleted it and never uploaded it. But here it is. I'm going to get to it. So let's go back to the summer, the excruciatingly hot summer of 2001. July, I think it was. Uh, 2000. I had been a stockbroker in my community for less than 2 years. I was 26 years old, looked 19. Uh, I remember I worked for a firm. We would go out and we would make 25 contacts a day, cold calls, knocking on doors, stopping at small businesses. And one of the guys that trained me told me to never take my jacket off, no matter how hot it got, to start parting my hair on the left. I used to part it in the center, and to grow a goatee, all to make me look older. Because he said nobody's going to want to give a kid a bunch of their money, and you look like a damn kid. So I took his advice. I did it. So one hot day in July, I was out cold calling on businesses, and I stopped at a used car lot, but the cars were like, primo. They looked like they were brand new. They were like 3 years old or less, but they were used cars, previously owned cars. And I stopped just to introduce myself to the owner of the business, let him know, who I was and what I did. Trying to drum up business, right? Well, I walked into the showroom, and it was a small place. There was somebody inside, and they said, well, he's out on the lot with a customer, so you'll have to wait till he comes in. So I look out on the lot, and I see the owner. He was probably 50-ish, and he was with a woman that was between 50 and 55 years old, early 50s. Watch for movement and keep listening. I'm just going to say it like it is. She was the most beautiful woman over 50 I'd ever seen in my life. Okay? She had like an olive complexion. She had long, straight, hair almost down to her waist, and it was silver. Like this shirt. This shirt's gray. It was gray hair, but it had like a shine to it, like it was silver. Great body. You could tell she probably spent several hours a day in the gym, and she was in her early 50s. And I remember just thinking, this is the most beautiful woman over 50 I'd ever seen. Now, at the time, like I said, I was 26. I'm almost 50 now. It's right around the corner. But that was old back then for me, okay? So I felt like I wanted to talk to her too. I'm just a healthy guy, So they made their way over to the office, into the showroom, and he went back to do something, I don't know, get paperwork. She was definitely buying a car. And I approached her and I said, ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're here to buy a car, but I just wanted to give you my card, and I did, and tell you who I am and what I do. I told her I work with investments and stuff. And then I, got back out of the way before the guy came out, sold her the car. So she left, and I went and I introduced myself to the guy, and he was like, hey, thanks for coming by. I can appreciate your hard work. I was doing the same thing, that you're doing now when I was your age, and that's how I was able to get to where I am. It's amazing how, hard work pays off. It really does. If you just do it relentlessly and persistently and consistently, and you just don't give up ever. Never, ever, ever give up. You might give up just before the miracle happens, So this guy, he pushed when he was young. So he was, 50-ish or so. He was successful, previously owned car lot dealer owner. But he said, I don't have a need for you. I'm really comfortable with my investment advisor, but thanks for coming by. And I said, okay. So anyway, I said, hey, I'm just curious, because that woman was gorgeous. Who is that? And he said, well, he says, all I know about her is that, like you can obviously see, she's gorgeous. She comes by here once a year. She buys a new, previously owned car, and somehow over the course of a year puts about 100,000 miles on it, and comes back the next year and buys another one, and she always pays in cash. Well, that's a lot of driving. She's making some money, obviously. She's buying these cars with cash, They were like in the neighborhood of $20,000 back then. So I didn't think much more of it. I went on with my day, made my 25th contact, went home. They're getting close. Well, a day or two later, I'm sitting in my office. This woman called. We're going to call her Delilah. This is not her real name, okay? I am not going to tell you her real name because you could do what I did a little later in the story and find out exactly who she is and exactly who a man she mentioned is. I'll tell you the position of the man because it's necessary for the story, but I'm not mentioning any names. Not here, not now. And even when I wrote the story, I didn't mention any names. So she calls me and she says, you remember me? I met you on a car lot a couple days ago. Of course I remember her. I was like, yeah, I remember you. Yeah. And she goes, well, I'm calling because I want to know how much money you're, used to dealing with, how much money you invest for people. And, I was young and naive and dumb, and I didn't have any concept of how many people actually have money because I, grew up in Appalachian, didn't come from money. I didn't grow up with people that came from money. I was, when I went through training for these financial services firms and I finally picked one and then went into independent practice, I was embarrassed by how little I knew about finance. It's like I didn't. So I'm glad I was in that field. I did that for 8 years. And the knowledge I took from it was worth more than the money I made while I did it. And the conversations that I had with my clients, most of whom were World War II generations, was worth more than any of the money I ever made. So many of the stories I tell, so many of the stories I write, are only capable of being told and written because of those conversations I had with the greatest generation, who's now pretty much gone. There's not a whole lot of them left. But I was still naive, and, I just assumed most people didn't have much money. And I told her, I said, well, I said, you can open an account here for as little as $25 a month, as long as you, contribute monthly to like your mutual funds or whatever. But I have, I manage more than that. I have a couple clients that have $1 million. And I did. It was true. And I thought, she's going to be impressed. I got some clients that have $1 million. And she goes, well, that's a shame. And I was like, why is that a shame? She goes, well, I've got a lot more than that. And I was hoping, I could find somebody with the experience who's managed a lot of money. I said, well, how much do you have? Delilah, even though that's not her name. That's the name of that radio show host. Remember? Late Nights with Delilah or whatever. So she says $35 million. And I was like, you have $35 million? And she goes, yeah, I do. She goes, you've probably never managed an account that big, have you? And I said, I'm going to be completely honest with you. No, I haven't. But I would love to have the opportunity to do so. I said, I can understand if you want to, work with somebody more established, maybe even older, but all I would request is you give me a shot at earning your business. And she said, okay, that's fair enough. She goes, I can appreciate the fact that you were out there cold calling in 90+ degree weather in July in Virginia. A lot of people, they're like door-to-door salesmen. Oh, that must be embarrassing. That must be humiliating. I slam the doors on those people's faces. You might, but let me tell you, self-made money, they appreciate it because once upon a time they were doing the same thing. Maybe not, perhaps the door-to-door thing, but they were taking risks. They were exiting their comfort zone, and they were working very hard. Where success lies? I saw this on a bumper sticker here a while back, and I'm not going to become too motivational speaker here with this, but this sticker said, success lies just on the other side of your comfort zone. And I thought, that is so true. All right, so anyway, she came to my office the next day. She said, here's what I want. I've got $35,000 or $35 million. I want it to be invested. See, I don't want it in the stock market, and I want it to be insured, and I want any dividends or income that it produces or generates to be tax-free. And I said, well, that's pretty easy. I said, so there's these things called tax-free municipal bonds. They're issued by municipalities, hospitals, airports, government agencies. You can get them AAA rated and insured, and the interest they pay is tax-free. Now, interest rates are disgustingly low now. I do feel bad for retirees who have large nest eggs who are hoping to draw decent interest from their savings. They're not going to get it now. Like bonds are paying, 2 or 3%? Back then, we could still get tax-free bonds paying 6%, okay, tax-free. The taxable equivalent yield, and by that I mean if you were to buy a corporate bond that's taxable that would give you that same real rate of return on your money, you'd have to find something about 9.5 or 10%. Those weren't out there. So I mentioned to her, I said, let me contact our bond desk. This is going to be a big order to fill, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on getting you a collection of insured tax-free bonds that'll pay income. Those bonds only pay they pay their interest twice a year, so it's every 6 months. But you can ladder them and stagger them to where you have different bonds that were issued in different months and mature in different months of different years, so you get monthly income. And it was going to generate a big old pile of tax-free cash for it, and she liked it. She said, I like this idea. I'm willing to come back and see your presentation. And I said, well, thank you for that. I said, but I'm curious because, mind you, this was before the dot-coms burst. This was about a month before September 11th happened, okay? Stock market was going crazy, especially the NASDAQ. And I said, why is it that you feel you don't want to be in the market and money has to be insured? And she said, because the stock market is getting ready to go to hell. It's going to crash, the biggest crash like you've never seen, like I've never seen, speaking of herself, not since like the Great Depression. I was like, well, that's interesting you say that, because I do believe a lot of these dot-com companies are overvalued, overpriced. Reality's got to sink in at some point. Is this why you feel that the market's going to crash? And she said, absolutely not. It has nothing to do with that. And I said, well, what's that have to do with? And she said, we're getting ready to see terrorist attacks on the largest scale you could ever imagine. Stuff that happens in Israel and Palestine, the Middle East, that we've always said couldn't happen here in the United States, is getting ready to happen, and when it does, the market's going to hell, and I don't want to be in it. Well, then I started thinking, maybe she stayed weird a little too long, right? Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But I was also doing the math in my head. If I would have gotten that account, the commission would have been something like $60,000, which was more money than I made that entire year. So I said to her, I'm curious also, where's this money coming from? And she says, it's my money. I said, well, where'd you get it? Did you earn it? Did you inherit it? She goes, it's my money. I'm like, okay, good enough. And I remembered where I was. I'm not back in Appalachia. At that time when I moved here, Albemarle County, which is where Charlottesville is located, was the third wealthiest county per capita in the United States. Lots of trust babies here. Lots of retired celebrities, just a lot of people have a lot of money. So I figured, well, that's probably her story. So it took me a few days to work up the proposed portfolio, but when I finally got it worked up, I called her. I said, hey, come on in. I got some ideas for you I think you're going to like. She comes in, I pitched the portfolio, and my first wife, I was married, my first wife at the time, and we already had the minivan picked out. She already had the minivan picked. I've never owned a minivan. I would rather be castrated first. So this story doesn't end as badly as I thought, I guess. I've made it until I'm almost 50 and I've never owned a minivan. Okay, but I heard they're comfortable. Okay, so she comes in, I pitch her the portfolio, and she says, this is exactly what I want. She said, I'm going to be honest with you. She said that she has a broker at Merrill Lynch. They were bought out by Bank of America. She said he's older. He warned her about coming to anybody under 30 with that much money, but he didn't present to her what she was looking for and what she wanted. So she said, I like this. I want to do this. I said, great. Well, then write a check. And she said, well, I don't have the money today. I said, well, when are you going to have the money? And she goes, soon, very soon. Something is going to happen very, very soon, and I will have $35 million, and we're going to put it in all these bonds. And I said, okay, that sounds great. And I said, I'm curious, what kind of work do you do? She told me that she drives around the United States. And mind you, she had a PhD. She drives around the United States and goes in and out of high-security prisons, and she educates people. That's what she said. I'm like, what do you mean educate people? She goes, oh, there might be prisoners that maybe were illiterate. She goes, I've worked with people who, were 17 and they murdered somebody and they were tried as adults and they're in prison for life. And when they entered prison, they didn't even know how to read. And she explained that she's taught them to read, and now they're big avid readers. Some of them are writers and all this stuff. And I was like, well, that's pretty neat. That sounds like, I thought, man, that job pays $35 million. Something's not adding up here. So we talked a little more, and she mentioned about how she was so happy that I didn't recommend she put a single dollar of her $35 million in the stock market because it was going to crash and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh gosh, here we go with this. Every time I think this is going to work out great, she goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs again, right? And I said to her, what do you know that I don't? And what she did? She told me what she knew that I didn't. And again, I give you my word, this is a true story, and it's probably not the safest story for me to tell on social media. But she said, have you ever heard of so-and-so? And she mentioned this man's name. And I said, no, I've never heard of him. Well, she said he was her uncle. It was her father's brother or something. I was like, I don't know who he was. Well, he used to be head of the Treasury Department for the United States. And I'm not going to say during which administration, because that would just get me nailed. Okay, I'm like, okay, whatever. So he was this big government bigwig, and I'm figuring out in my head, okay, well, she comes from money. Right? She comes from money. She's like a Clinton or a Bush, political dynasty, tons of money just piling up. These things, politicians that get paid $40,000 a year, but after they serve their term, they're worth millions. You know what I mean? Just saying. So she leaves. We're into September now, okay? Met her in July. We're getting together through August. We're into September. I'd call her like a week later. Hey, Delilah, do you have that money? Because these bonds are starting to sell out of inventory. And it was true that they were. She goes, no, not yet. And that time I called her, she sounded frantic. She sounded hectic. She said, I have to get out of here. I have to leave Virginia, but I will have the money soon, and I will call you from, wherever she was going. I was like, okay, I'm thinking she's going on a trip. The next day, 9/11, September 11, 2001, the world's changed. Planes flew into the Twin Towers, the Pentagon. One, was decimated up in the air. Well, it crashed into a field in Pennsylvania because the passengers took it down once they found out what was going on. I forgot all about this woman. I forgot all about the money. I forgot all about the commission, but I was still having nightmares about the minivan. But I heard they're comfortable. Watch that thing and see if it moves. So a few days go by, and I'm just going to tell you this. At the time, I was not a smoker. I was not a drinker. But after 3 or 4 days after 9/11, the stock market was closed. Remember, they halted trading. They grounded all the airlines. Me and my assistant were pacing our office floors, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, wondering what the hell we were going to do with the rest of our lives. It's a true story. So, in the middle of the day, we're sitting there. Stock market's still closed. Phone's just ringing off the hook. Everybody's saying they wanted to cash their account out. World's going to hell. All the money, the financial system's going to collapse. And I was like, I would tell them, we can't sell nothing because the stock market's closed. I can't, sell off your stuff. So my assistant comes back. He looks at me. He goes, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And I read his mind. True story. At the same time, we both just said, Delilah. I ran over and I picked up the phone and I called her, and her number had been disconnected. Me and my assistant, it was a guy, got in my car and we drove to her house, and her house had been abandoned. It's like gone. No one's there. Never heard from this woman again. Never heard from her again. And then sometime later, after I'd gone and enlisted and all this stuff because of what happened, and I was in Iraq, and somebody told me I should watch something, and you can get it on YouTube. It's called Zeitgeist, which is a German word which means the times in which we live, or our modern times. And That's when I found out who this woman's uncle was, because during that video, it shows how the power elite uses such things as money, religion, fear to control the masses, keep everybody in line. And again, I'm not saying I support these views or anything like this, and it's a very touchy subject on social media. I'm merely telling you what happened. One of my battle buddies kept saying, you got to watch this, so I finally watched it. And there was a bit of information in there on this woman's uncle. I'm still not going to say his last name, but this is definitely going to narrow it down to a bunch. He's one of the founding members of the Trilateral Commission. And when I saw that, I got chills. And I was in Iraq in 08 and 09, so this would have been 7 years after I'd met with this woman and pretty much at all but forgotten this story I've just told you. I'd written her off for crazy. I'd written her off as a nut, and I'd written it all off to perfect timing in regards to getting lucky with her predictions. So I'm telling this story for two reasons, finally. You know, September 11th's coming up, and so it just always comes to my mind here this time of year. And a lot of folks have been asking me what I think about what's going on with that snafu in Afghanistan, where we left over 100 citizens behind and all that crap. What do I think about it? What are my thoughts? This is the closest I'm going to come to telling you my thoughts after having told you this story, so I believe you'll understand. I heard an interview with one of the women, a U.S. citizen who was left behind in Afghanistan with like 26 kids or something. I don't know if she's teaching or whatever. But she said, I don't know who to believe anymore. That's how I feel. After going through that experience with this beautiful woman I met on a used car lot, and then seeing how things unfolded after that, I just don't know what to believe anymore. But I give you my word, the story I just told you is 100% true. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I do not support conspiracy theorism. There's stuff out there that happens and goes on that I think a lot of people just don't know about. This story was one of them. So thanks for being here again for another story at Homesteading Off the Grid, whatever the hell this channel's about. And Timothy / Thaddeus, Howard and Sean, and the wonderful lady that's in your all's lives. I think it's Kristen or Kirstine. Forgive me. I read your comment quickly. No disrespect if I got your name wrong, which I probably did. But I'll see you guys for more next time from here at Homesteading Off the Grid.